technology today, but I do have some handouts for you. And you can follow along on the topics. I want to make sure I don't forget to share with you today. So I feel like now that I've been doing this for a year and a half, been knowledgeable of the topics for 2 years, I feel like I can talk for hours. But what I want to do today is just really focus on how this is going to look for us as home visitors and how it relates to the family. So some of you might have heard about virtue-based restorative discipline. It was created here in St. Louis by Lynn Lang, and it is used in both of the schools that are part of this grade. So of course, we want to be involved, right? But the core of this, and what I think that you could pick up and learn, unless you'd like to learn more, and teach even to the families, and use even in your particular visits, is the circle process. So the circle process comes from, again, some social science data that is based upon, actual studies. And this is saying that this simple technique is a way of teaching social and emotional literacy, and it's also a technique for just creating a safe space for the child. So some of the books as references I brought along, you're welcome to look at afterwards, is the original one, which is non-biblical, but understands the same concept of circle processes and that it's used as a peacemaking approach. This is from like 1960s, 1970s. And then that evolved into IRP. You can. And then this is Lynn's book, which is the comprehensive guide, and there's an implementation program as well. And then there's also, these two books are more of what has branched out with the Saved Foundation, as I introduced, where the front of this particular manual is for all adults, families, anyone who would like to use this in their homes. And so these two are more of the books that could be resources for the families. So what has happened with the circle process is we have allowed virtue education and our faith to intertwine with the basics of these principles. So a simple circle process, which we'll do after lunch, is a community type setting where there's an open space and everybody is sitting around together. There's also a talking piece. Those stones remind me of this talking piece that we use, or sometimes we have this one that's given out a lot during our summer institute. Both of them are smooth, so even as adults when we're doing our circle, it's just something to hold, and those that have the talking piece are the ones that are speaking. So this circle process begins with a prayer. Then there's a one-word check-in. Could be, this is a little talking about your feelings, so it could be, how are you doing today? Everybody says one word. And then the circle keeper, the facilitator, or even yourself, you're the one who's going to guide that conversation. So it could be a community building circle where you're just getting to know everyone. In the home environment, it could be a circle just to talk. It's real, and we'll demonstrate that in a living room type setting. It can be just to start creating what they call a trust bank, where you may instill this process and they don't know that you're doing a circle. But it's a way for them to have that communication started with you that may be more open and inviting for them. So let's say you choose the topic, if you want to practice a circle on your third home visit, of how was your weekend? And then they tell you a little bit about their weekend, and then you can find out if they went to church that weekend. So it's a way for you to just, you don't come right out and say, did you go to Mass on Sunday, right? What'd you do this weekend? Open-ended questions, right? And you can even ask the child, did you play outside? Did you go to the park? Oh, it was raining, I didn't get to go to the park. That dialogue in a circle, you may not have with the child, but the 2-year-old can be involved. It can also be with the community of care, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then usually you don't want a circle to last more than about 10 minutes in our particular, we don't want to be there anyways for that long, that's not part of our program. But there can be a 15-minute circle that's very effective, just to start the conversation. So I was hoping that, as I'm sharing this with you today, that this is a tool that you can use if you're in an uncomfortable home environment. You may have a personality that's different than you when you approach that family. It could be a different culture. You know, you may just have traditions that are different than you, even though you share a faith. Or maybe you don't share a faith and we're evangelizing. So this can be a technique that can be used in that particular moment as well. So I feel like I'm here for that reason. And at the end of the circle, we'll also always do a checkout. You know, if it's a newer person, they've never been in a circle before, I like to say, how did you feel about the circle today? Great, wonderful, interesting, nervous. You know, you'll get all those emotions. So, and the blessing, again, we can close in prayer. So closing in prayer at the circle that I came from this morning, that's why I was late, with parents, you know, we were able to close in our Father because, you know, we share that faith, we all go to school, I knew the parents that were there. But you may want to personalize your prayer as you're evangelizing. You could also use it as a teaching moment. You know, you could bring in, you know, a Hail Mary prayer if they feel comfortable, if you're at that point in your visit. It can be also a teaching moment for prayers. And so, and I attached some of the prayers that BBRD has. I think that's on the last handout, just so you know it's there. And also a list of virtues. So those are just some particular prayers that are used during our summers too. So I guess I want to get to the nitty-gritty a little bit in reference to why. I'm going to move fast, but if you want to ask me questions, of course, I'm pretty used to that being interrupted. But I didn't time myself beforehand. So if I leave lots of time at the end for questions, I'm just going to go through the material. So why are we using restorative practices with virtue education? Well, the science part of it is this particular thing called the compass of shame, right? I could be very honest. I was raised in a home with two different faiths, but they both were Christian and they both believed in God. So, you know, the non-Catholic extended family was like, oh, it's always shame. You know, you're shamed into everything. So that gave me an interesting feeling about Catholicism. Maybe other people that we're going to talk to has that feeling as well. So living all these years and older now, I don't necessarily agree with that now, but it's something to know and think about as we're going, and really try to have the empathy for those that we're going to speak to and the families that we're going to talk to, and understand the shoes that they're in. Maybe they feel that way. I don't know. But this particular compass of shame talks about the negative behaviors that do result from a shaming type situation. So for example, if we're trying to create a good home environment between caregivers and also between a parent and a child, we want to reduce these negative behaviors. The first one, when a child is shamed, is withdrawn. So that child may just run away, right? So that's the children that, you know, you yell at them and they run out of the room, right? And then you got the example of the 2-year-old that starts isolating himself. Doesn't want to play anymore, doesn't want to go out with, you know, and socialize with the friends, doesn't want to come to the family table, doesn't want to sit next to you when you're watching TV because you've shamed them, you've withdrawn. Reducing the negative behaviors as well will stop them from attacking other people. That is another way, another negative behavior that using these techniques hopes to reduce. So making sure that they're not hitting other people or blaming other people. It does not have to be physical. I have seen 2-year-olds that are verbal attackers. So that is a form. And then also, of course, which is pretty obvious, attacking yourself. So you don't want the 2-year-old, luckily I've only seen it in my textbooks and in my clinicals, but the child that, you know, is attacking themselves or hitting themselves because they've had discipline. Now, we see this as adults in an older situation, and we're thinking, oh, adolescence, you know, this is something, you know, that we could talk about in reference to abnormal psychology or something like that. But I honestly believe that this is, like, 2-year-olds do the same thing. So creating a safe space for the 2-year-old is so important because these negative behaviors start then. So avoidance, denial, I didn't hit her. We call that in kindergarten and first grade lying, right? But does a child who's 2-year-old or 3-year-old just automatically go, I'm going to get hit if I did something wrong, so I'm not even going to admit that I did it, and learn how to lie at 2 and 3? And then we worry about, second grade confession, and thank goodness we have that in our faith, and we fix that problem. But can we prevent it, right? And a lot of restorative practices, when you're talking about circle process and community building, or in your home, family building, is about preventative maintenance. We don't want to get to that point. So this is the science part, right? So I talked already about how important having that space is in reference to a trust bank. I want to give the example of our schools, just so you guys know. Circles are part of the implementation process, are done once a week. And in the beginning of school, there's not a lot of behavior, right? The children are just getting to know each other, they're not comfortable yet, they're all on their best behavior. And if you have circle times in the best situation, then that's a comfortable space for when something does go wrong. So like you were saying with the family meal time, if you do that every day, when a child has a bad day, that's a safe place for them to come. And think about a child who doesn't have a safe place to go to. So the mealtime can kind of be a circle talk, really. And so I just want to make sure that as we're talking about attacking others, later on when I go to just some basic guidelines that are in the implementation guide, it'll talk about making sure if you do try to do a circle with your in your home visits, that you follow those guidelines, because when people are in an uncomfortable situation or they're sharing something that happened, if you follow the guidelines, it'll help to prevent them attacking people within that safe space, within that circle. So we're not necessarily going to the point where we're caregivers, but I have a feeling that as we build relationships with these families, there's going to be things that come out that, one, we might want to know how to handle, and two, I want to help you at least have a tool of how to handle it. Okay, so the next box in reference to the literature that's used to teach restorative practices is it's called Restorative Square, the width box. Everybody, when you're reading all the material, they'll say, you got to be in the width box, right? And that's kind of true. You want to be with your child on this spiritual journey. You want to make sure that you're doing things with them. You're not just doing them to them, right? So, for example, we'll use 2-year-olds, right? So you're dealing with your 2-year-old in math, right? So you're gonna be punitive to them, right? So you're gonna say, you're gonna sit down, you're gonna do what you're supposed to do, that's what you have to do, right? That's being authoritative, punitive, exactly. Or you're gonna be neglectful, right? Just let them do whatever they want. Run around the pews, put their feet up, play with books, eat their crackers, spill it all over. That would be neglectful, right? Kind of. Or you could be permissive, which means that you, which I fall into a little bit, I let them hug all over me and play with me and distract me so that I can't have my time during Mass. But to be with them is to be a little bit of both. So you're going to have to be a little bit authoritative to say, yes, this is the time to stand up, please. You have to be a little bit permissive and loving and say, okay, well, I don't think I can go up to communion today. I can't carry this 3-year-old or this 2-year-old's 40 pounds. Okay, I'll just go to Mass by myself, on Tuesday, right? So as restorative means that you're in that with the child. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. I don't know how much background you have. So I just wanted to share that with you so you'd really understand, I'm thinking about our schools as well, because I don't know if I apologize, I missed the introduction, but there is a little bit within us this is promoting our schools, right? So I think it's very important to have this background education because this is where the way that we would best operate in our schools if we were practicing our BBRD discipline. So,
Can I just mention one thing with this? I've been reading a lot of Greg Boyle, who wrote Tattoos on the Heart, Father Greg Boyle, if you know of him. He works with gang members. But he talks about this, he doesn't call it a whiff box, but he talks about the virtue of kinship, or the experience of kinship. And he talks about these people who've been so abused and beaten down and done so many wrong things that they feel ashamed. And what he does is practice tenderness and support them and appreciate them, so that he says he gives them back to themselves. Or when someone does that to us, they give us back to ourselves. They help us to, again, just embrace who we are and feel okay about ourselves. And that's what I'm hearing you say here in that whip box, is we have to address children who do things wrong, but in a way that doesn't make them feel worse about themselves, but restores them through there.
exactly. All right. Well, again, how would this circle process be taught in a home visit? It could just be a way of introducing them how to build relationships. Because I think, and I shared a lot of my memories when we met over the summer. And I think about when I first walked into my grandparents' house. The first thing we did was sit around in a circle, basically, the living room, and we told jokes. And we talked about the weather, and we did those type of things. You know, or in my other grandma's house, it was the same sort of thing, but it was the kitchen table, right? And we always shared whatever she made seasonally, you know, strawberry rhubarb pie, or, you know, strawberry pretzel dessert, whatever was seasonal that year. And so before we went into any of the, okay, how you doing in school? You know, it's very cordial. So, you know, that is the way I think is the first way circle process can be introduced to a family. But also there are ways that we could use it for conflict resolution. So for example, this just spends a little bit on the circle, but when the facilitator is guiding the circle, you want to focus on the past, the present, and the future. So some of the questions that's in Lynn's book is find out what happened, right? Well, the 2-year-old had their first play date, right? They had a friend over from down the street, and that 2-year-old hit their friend, threw a toy at them. And so the parents kind of upset, and they share that with you at your home visit, right? I'm really upset. You know, I tried to, you know, have my first play date with my child, and that child threw a toy, and I think the mom's gonna hate me, and you know, my child's not gonna adjust well, I can't send him to preschool yet, and there's all these nerves, right? I could see that being something that's, you know, shared on visit 2, visit 4, right? And so you wanna talk about, okay, that's what happened, right? And the next step is, let's make things as right as possible. Have you talked to that other mom? Have you tried to restore that relationship? Have you even spoke about it? Maybe their child is 6 months older and went through the same thing. Because there's a lot of age gap. Because I'm thinking personally, I'm on child number 4. If you go to visit them in January with a 2.5-year-old or a 2-year-old, and then you visit them on visit number 4 6 months later, and they're potty trained, ready to go to preschool. You know, our conversations are so, and I know you probably already talked about this, but they're gonna have to be in the moment. So it's really, I mean, you guys are all special people, that's all I have to say. Because I feel like you could be the facilitators, you are gonna be in the moment, and it's gonna be great. So I'm so excited. And then the last thing is you're gonna say, you guarantee that it's not gonna happen in the future. So most importantly, it's just like anytime you go to confession, right? You take your child and you say, what did you do? What was wrong? How are we gonna make sure it doesn't happen again? I think a 2-year-old can understand that. I just don't want you to throw your toy again. Make it that simple, right? So these are huge concepts, scientifically based, that I think can really just be a tool so that it takes you out of the emotions, takes you out of the box, and it gives you a strategy while you're in the home, and it's a strategy you can share with the parents as well. In reference to just saying those same things again in a different way, what happened? you can't say this part to a 2-year-old, but what were you thinking at the time? What have you thought of since? So this would be more of what you'd say to the caregivers. I don't want to say mom or dad because it could be grandma or grandpa. And then 4th, who has been affected by the action? And how can we make things as right as possible? Let me go back to number 4, because this is the huge thing I think for our particular group of people we're going to be working for, is who was affected, right? So you've got this 2-year-old, and you're going to go to Thanksgiving, you're going to go to Christmas, and they're going to probably do something to somebody else's home that makes somebody upset, right? So this circle of care and the actions of your 2-year-old goes beyond just you and him or himself or herself, right? So we really have to think about the circle of care in reference to how the behavior affects everybody. And that goes the other way around too. So when dad and mom are fighting, or brother is saying bad words, how is that affecting the child? Because the child is in that circle too. So it's really, I think it's simple, but you have to be intentional when you're thinking about the environment of the child. Does that make sense? Okay. So, like I said before, we'll do a circle as adults, and it'll be a little bit different, but I think a child can be involved in a circle if it's community building, if it's talking about what you did this weekend, or what the weather is, or, if we're going to relate it to even that picture, having a child draw a picture, and having a circle time after the activity. It doesn't matter. It's just opening up the conversation. So why should a home visitor talk about BBRD to the parents? So as I said before, this is the disciplinary process that we use in our school. It is not just, there's still the original discipline plan. BBRD is the extension because we want to restore the relationship. We don't want to constantly exclude everyone. We want to but we don't want to let people be permissive and do what they want. So this tries to be with the education of the virtues, which I included those as well as a reminder of all the virtues you can use or focus in as a family, as an individual, as you're working on your own development as a home visitor. What virtues, as you teach that, are used to handle different situations? So the virtue education is the restorative way of saying, yes, you did wrong, but you're still part of God's family. We still want you to be here. How can we fix this in the future? So this is not only just creating a better home environment for the child, but it may spill over and be a better home environment for the parent as well, because they could use these skills with each other or with the older children. And then also, the process is based in our faith. So Lynn Lang, did all this research. She was working for, just one of the hospitals, talking about the anti-bullying, all that went on. Unfortunately, here in St. Louis, about 15 years ago with the online bullying incident. She was part of all that. And she said, but I have a passion to go back and relate it to my faith. So, the outcomes of using this process are desired by all Christian families. So it creates an emotional safe home. It will decrease the antisocial behavior because they'll be more willing to come in and spend time and share things with you. It'll be a deeper resolution of conflicts. So it's not just going to say you're in timeout. That's not really going to solve everything every time. Sometimes they need timeout, but it's not going to solve it every time. It's going to strengthen your family, and also it's going to challenge yourself. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the more you do restorative practices and you go to these summer institutes and you learn these things, it ends up being a challenge to your own faith, to work on your own virtues, and to become a better educated Christian. So it's very exciting. I wanted, before I just do some contact information and go over those guiding principles, I just wanted to open up the discussion for a minute. What do you think the benefits of teaching about BBRD and the circle process would be to our homes that we visit. What do you guys think, just learning about it for the first time?
I'm kind of a little bit confused. I mean, I'm thinking of it as classroom-based with 20 people, or, and it's like, how do you do that with maybe one adult and one kid? How's that gonna work? And that
You want a
looks whole lot
demonstration?
different. Yes.
Okay. Would you like to be in my circle? Would you like to be in my circle?
Okay.
Okay. All right, let's start in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to spend our time together, and I'm so excited that we are able to get here through all the snow. Amen. How are you today? How's your day?
Sleepy.
I was sleepy. How are you
The
feeling?
2-year-old or the parent?
Mom. Two parents.
Two parents.
The 2-year-old.
How are you today? How are you today?
Well, I'm happy that you're here, but I'm really tired.
Tired. Okay. All right. Well, really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, it was good. We had just a few tantrums here and there, but otherwise it was okay.
Okay, well, I am not sleeping. I drank my coffee, so I'm here. Yes. Well, I was just wondering, like, how have things changed since the last time I was here? I haven't been here for a while. How have things changed in the house?
As a 2-year-old, huh?
No, all right. Yeah. What's new? What's exciting?
That's exciting.
What's been going on?
Maybe.
Really? Tell me about that.
Well, they had a party in the backyard when they moved in. We didn't go over there, but there's one parties. And there was a kid a different age, bigger kids, all over there for the party. So I'm curious to do that.
That's exciting. Any change for you since I've been here?
Well, I'm happy to see Mary finally going over to that little space that we talked about. She's doing
My kids love it, and since we're working on this virtue of gentleness, it is just perfect for them to just So, yeah, like speaking of virtues though, like we're doing gentleness right now because that's what the school's doing, and I was like, this is just what we're doing. Last time we talked about love, because we were talking about Jesus coming into the world at Christmas, and love, was just something that we really were talking about. And this time I'm here, and there's another holiday coming up. Does anybody know what that is that comes up in February?
Valentine's Day.
Oh, so love is what they call a virtue. Is there anything that you remember that shows love at Valentine's Day?
Give things.
Is there anything that's your favorite about Valentine's Day?
Yeah, my
That's right. So, I just wanted to again talk about that virtue of love. And before we close in a quick prayer and do our activity, is there any stories about when you felt God's love? I know that's kind of hard to talk about, but like when we talked about the prayer shawl, the first time we came, that was that love that God shows. Do you have any stories that you could share with me or tell me about love? I know this is the hardest one.
We go to grandma's and we get a big hug.
Grandma shows you? Oh, I love grandma. They're great. Yeah.
Well, I love when Daddy comes home and gives me a hug and a kiss at night. And then, you can sit down at the table together. To me, that's an experience of love with my family.
That's the sense of time that Dad spends at home. That's great. Okay, well, we're going to say a quick prayer and then we get to do our activity. Ready? Okay. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Oh, that's so exciting. You worked on that, didn't you?
We sat during the last break.
Oh, man. Okay, so do you see what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like it can still be
So,
there though.
yeah, so you're doing it as the facilitator, and that might be something they can grab pieces of eventually.
Right, and it's a very informal way to gain knowledge. Do you, in the books, it talks about nonverbal behavior. Did you see more nonverbal behavior as a facilitator? We try to be very positive. Do we talk about anything negative?
And that, let me just mention that for our whole process, because we are there to find what the families are doing right, not to come in as the experts to say, oh, this is wrong, you gotta fix this. Build on their strengths, and then lead them, and this is a great process to do it, to something more. And hopefully we can get them to choose to something more that they feel they need to grow in as well. But what if Daria had really done something wrong? You know, what is there something that, like your first example, if I'm upset because my child is always hitting another child, or, you know, whatever it is, could that be addressed in a circle like this with the child and the parent, or would you just give the parent tools to talk to the child?
No, I think it could, because when you talk about nonverbal communication, you can bring that subject up in a way that allows the child to see the sadness in the mother's face or the father's face. That's a nonverbal behavior that the parent can give without discipline. Because like it said, right? It said that there's a constant connection between mother and child, parent and child, caregiver and
And
child.
the child can understand that, can feel that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, for example, just pretend, right? When she says there was a party in the neighbor, a little kid would say, but I was not invited. So that would be like a huge thing for that child, and would that be brought up and discussed about it, and possibilities of why wasn't he invited?
And it could be that in the moment thing too. I imagine if there's something strong enough and you're comfortable with a circle, you can change gears and say, well, this is what we ought to talk about instead.
And that becomes a challenge for you guys, is to know your virtues. Because if we wanted to go into that particular topic, well, let's talk about unity. What does unity of our family look like? What does unity of our neighborhood look like? Or kindness? Well, do we come over and bring them a welcome basket when they moved in? Do we introduce ourselves? Maybe they don't know us. I know that actually happened with my neighbor. It took us a good 6 months, and she said, I'm so sorry. I just moved from the city, and my neighbors were horrible, and I was so scared to meet you, and I'm so glad that they're not, and I just want to let you know the only thing that really bothers me is trash in your yard. And I said, I got that. And ever since then, we've been great. So, you know, it really is, it's going to be a skill. And like I said later, there's a lot of more training available if you're interested. So that bothers me.
So I want to just to kind of step back and step in, and so, because especially, so say that a lot of parents are single. It's about half of American mothers are single in the toddler age, or don't have a strong and stable relationship. But even those that have a spouse, the spouses often say, well, how can I fix? And so just even there's something incredibly powerful at the kid and the child and say to the parent, we're going around the circle, how did this make you feel? And another skill that Beth didn't highlight that she did beautifully is the ability to know when to share. So when you ask the check-in, you do that, and then the check-in stuff, the facilitator is building part of the community. But to go back to like, what does this all mean? What is the point of it? Like from my vision, I think like VBRD is this idea for little kids has some real power, because I would summarize virtue-based restorative discipline as making a few main points. This is extracting from a lot of stuff, and Lynn might describe it slightly differently, but I think if I'm explaining to parents like what is it that we do, we're saying, one, we're restoring and disciplining, not punishing. It's all about the with. But two, we're giving models of goodness, and the virtue is about vocabulary of goodness. And goodness is related to each other. That this is scientifically proven but also it goes back to Aristotle. We've known this forever, that virtue is about habits, that we have, we can call them holy habits, we have good habits that we are going to, that what if we get good at doing one good thing, we get good at doing all the good things. And so if we're good at loving one person, it makes it a lot easier to love the next person. Love is a little tricky because sometimes the biochemical stuff makes it confusing. But if we get good at being unity, if we're a cheerleader for our family, being unified, we can be. It makes it easier to be a cheerleader for other groups who belong to being unified. If we're good at disciplining ourselves when it comes to how much sugar we put in our coffee, we're going to be better at disciplining ourselves when it comes to how fast we drive on the highway. And those all are connected. So, but I think for the 2-year-olds, like this thing of, it's taking what you as parents, with the exception of sister and I, that know intuitively, and most of you do these things, like Beth talked about. The circle is just sitting around the table with grandma, but doing it intentionally with a plan and with someone who's serving as a facilitator in your visits. But we also want to teach them how to do the good habits that every parent stumbles onto at least sometimes, intentionally more often, so that it's that the quadrants, you're going to hover around different quadrants. We want to be in the with quadrant in discipline more than the punishment, because a lot of parents go back and forth between the punishment and neglect, but bounce back and forth, because it's a real art to get to that right place. And parents that have experienced, parents that are good parents, do it, but to do it intentionally. And so in a world pre-iPad, it was easier to get everybody around the table, at least at some point, and to actually include the 2-year-old in a conversation is not something that in a world post-iPad happens as much, because they're there in that corner, and so it has to happen intentionally. And so the circles is about as us as facilitators, or you as facilitators, because it would be best if I don't do it because I'm not very good at it. But the facilitators, you can use the circle tools to communicate and to build trust. To the trust bank, or trust fund was the clever top 20 words they use, the trust fund. But to build that trust, to teach how to communicate, and it's a way of where you can control conversation while them still listening to you. These are skills, and they're skills we teach all of our teachers in 1 week. So it's something we can all learn how to do. Some of the teachers are more on top of it than others, of course, but to teach them also to do circles, and you can use the language of circles, but it's just this idea of intentionally engaging in conversation in the house, which is actually proven to be it's highly correlated. The number of words a child hears by the time they're 5 is extremely well correlated with their success in college. And so just even having conversation. So we're doing a development thing, but it's more than that. It's about emphasizing the with. And as Sister said, that the research says that doing spirituality with, not to the child, has an incredible impact, that it's the sharing of the transcendence. And so I like the phrase, Matthew Kelly says, who's God in your house? He's Australian. So he actually exaggerates his accent a bit to sound cool. But it's this idea of I think we also part of with, that's not something that Lang talks about, because is that idea of that you yourself are subject to authority, and this emotional vulnerability of a parent. Not like there probably is some debate about whether a parent should say sorry to their kids very often. I don't know about that, but they should at least be able to see parents say sorry. That awareness of kind of like that the parent has to live the virtue too. It's hard for the parent to live the virtue, and instead of well, I want you not to promise to throw the toy, the step, and Beth in a full circle would have done this, the step is, well, what does it look like? Because the opposite of throwing a toy is somebody's face is not throwing a toy, but some virtue, and to use the virtue is to name it, and then we're saying, okay, we're not doing this, but because there's actually a scripture that doesn't show up in the Sunday lectionary, which is really unfortunate. It's from Luke, where Jesus says, And if a demon has been cast out of a house and it is swept clean, the demon will go find 7 friends. Seeing that it is all clean and ready, he'll come back in. And so this is for the spiritual life for adults. We say like, hey, it's not just don't do this. You know, part of AA is they don't just say like, okay, don't drink. Yeah, we're not drinking. Because an alcoholic, a former alcoholic who just doesn't drink is a miserable person who makes everybody miserable. A former alcoholic who has instead embraced doing positive things is someone who's, you're like, this is someone who's really neat to know. And so the same thing for a kid, which is I think part of the goal is good parents say no and they say yes to things too, not just yes to do this, but yes, that's a good thing. Like part of in school, we tell our kids, we try, both of the schools, if we catch kids doing virtues, that's one of the goals, is to tell it to them. And so I know this is a longer, but I wanted to kind of go, because Beth lives this every day, and it's just who become part of who she is. So I wanted to say it from someone who has not gone to any of the programs, because I'm too lazy to do that. But I think that there's a whole lot of power in helping parents, even with a 1.5-year-old, to systematize the good practices that good parents have done forever, and to do that, give them a language and tools so that they remember. I tell parents, if someone comes, oftentimes if someone comes to confession, like I yell at my kids too much, I'll talk about a toolbox, because you have to have a toolbox, because when we are stressed and there's coloring on the wall, and we open up our toolbox, and if we haven't arranged our toolbox well, the thing on the top is a hammer, because we don't have time to go digging through the toolbox to say, like, what's the clever phrase I'm going to come up with for this kid? How am I going to bring them back? How am I going to, we're just like, I need to deal with this now. Hammer, grab the first thing, and the first thing at the toolbox is always the hammer, unless you have intentionally put something else there first. And so I think VBRD, it comes from it comes from classroom and psychology. It comes from the classroom. It's an application of things for adults to the classroom, and now we're talking about to the home life. But it's really about helping parents build their toolbox, which we do not by teaching as much as but by example, and we can give them hints and language, because if you see the kid coloring on the wall and instead of like we say but I know what I'm going to need to say. I'm going to say like, so was this respectful of property? Or the phrase of these are phrases that, because I think mostly in terms of college, I was working with college students and adults and teachers and stuff, like that's what I think, but like, is that what you mean in this idea of belonging? Is that what we should be doing?